I find it troubling that this government is now targeting Joplin citizens' ability to speak at council meetings and choosing to push censorship through on the eve of our great nation's birth, when you know many of our citizens are out of town to challenge this. Those of you who know me well know that I am a conservative Christian who believes in God, family, and country, respectively. Sadly, whether it be due to the purposeful intent or blatant ignorance to what is truly going on in our city, I now find myself in the same position as many of your constituents, adamantly opposed to the agenda of this council, which fails to align with the majority of the citizens throughout this city. Many times when citizens, including myself, get up here and speak, I've repeatedly heard the council members say they wish more citizens would get up and speak to their concerns. However, tonight you're preparing to cast a vote as to whether you want to silence and muffle the voices of whom you claim to represent. You're going against the very fabric of this incredible nation that you claim to be defending. What message does that pass along to your constituents on the eve of our independence, which was the inception of our freedoms, rights, such as freedom of speech? Now you choose to wage war on our citizens' right to freedom of speech and question our government. Even more baffling is how our very own mayor stated on KZRG that citizens would stop getting their information on Facebook, apparently alluding to our audit team's effort in exposing serious financial mismanagement concerns and numerous red flags that indicate potential fraud or corruption. Ironically, this city utilizes the same Facebook platform to push their own agenda. Therefore, apparently you want citizens to solely get their information directly from the city's Facebook page alone, not anyone else. That sounds a great deal like our current agenda that they're pushing in Washington. Furthermore, this legislation gives unilateral power to an unelected mayor to silence any citizen whom they decide to shut down. We already know how dangerous usurping the power of representative leadership can be. Just look at how Senator Harry Reid blew up the filibuster for Supreme Court justices, which has proven to be a danger to the legal system and our republic. Ironically, our Facebook page only puts out information that we've been able to have experts analyze with the documentation and evidence coming straight out of this city's budget and financial books. These are all items that a state audit would be able to identify, but this seated leadership chooses to do everything in their power to block our efforts, such as advising citizens not to look at our documentation that we have from this city's own financial documents. And now this council is intentionally trying to block us from being able to speak publicly in this forum, which would hurt our citizens' ability to be able to stand up and speak to the concerns of those of whom sit before us tonight and those who will serve in the future. We recently met with various law enforcement agencies to present our documentation, as well as drove to Jefferson City and met with the state auditor's lead investigator, who was very encouraging of our efforts, stating that she saw a bunch of red flags already, validating that our vast documentation is extremely concerning and should be investigated. But this council response, sadly, is not to address these concerns, but instead to do everything in your power to try to force us to give up. And when that failed, you demeaned us. And when that failed to dissuade us in our efforts, and we continue to pursue the truth, now you work to shut down our voices, as well as any other voices from tax-paying citizens in the future. In conclusion, let me point out how dangerous these changes to our charter rules have wandered from constitutional law. Although the public meeting of a board or council meeting is classified as a limited public forum, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides protections to us and for free speech in public forums like this one. Legal scholars and our legal system states that when establishing rules of conduct, the governing body must be careful not to violate the protections that the meeting attendees enjoy under the First Amendment. In fact, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals addressed this issue in 2013 in Acosta versus the City of Costa Mesa, indicating where the line may lie between council rules that are enforceable and those that violate constitutional rights. In that case, the court held that the First Amendment requires that a person's free speech in a city council meeting must actually disrupt a meeting before that person may be removed from the meeting. This case provides a clear example of the language that a council may adopt for such a proposed rule. The court looked approvingly on the rules they stated. It shall be unlawful for any person in the audience at the council meeting to do anything of the following: engage in disorderly, disruptive, disturbing, delaying, or boisterous conduct such as, but not limited to, hand clapping, stomping of feet, whistling, making noise, use of profane language or obscene gestures, yelling, or similar demonstrations. Such conduct substantially interrupts, delays, or disturbs the peace and good order of the proceedings at the council. This is very in line with your currently adopted rules. Additionally, in New York Times versus Sullivan in 1964, this landmark case established the important protections for speech critical of public officials that includes elected and non-elected public officials who serve the citizens of a city. The court held that the First Amendment requires a higher standard of proof for defamation claims by public officials. It emphasized that uninhibited debate about public officials is a fundamental aspect of our democracy. Additionally, in Garrison versus Louisiana in 1964, the Supreme Court reiterated the First Amendment provides strong protections for speech that criticized public officials. It held that a Louisiana defamation law applied to statements made about public officials must meet a higher standard of proof to prevent a chilling effect on free speech, a chilling effect that you want to place on the citizens of Joplin whom you're supposed to represent. In Pickering versus Board of Education in 1968, this case clarified that public employees, including public officials, retain their First Amendment rights when speaking on matters of public concern. The court recognized that public debate and criticism of government officials are essential components of our democratic society. Sadly, our city employees are afraid to express their concerns to you out of fear of reprisal and the fear of losing their job. In Watts versus the United States, 1969, the court held that political hyperbole or statements that may be interpreted as offensive or distasteful but are not true threats or protected speech. This case emphasized that even provocating or strong statements criticizing public officials receive First Amendment protection. Finally, in Edwards versus South Carolina in 1963, the court recognized that peaceful protests and demonstrations against government policies, including those critical of public officials, are protected speech under the First Amendment. The ruling underscored the importance of allowing citizens to express dissenting views on matters of public concern. Therefore, as a matter of protecting the freedoms of our citizens and the validity of this council, I ask that each of you vote against this abomination and allow free speech to continue to reign in Joplin, Missouri, or the Joplin City Council will be remembered as the council who targets the God-given freedoms that have ruled over our land for many generations before.